In January of this year, a white paper was published by the Society of Mechanical Engineers entitled Global Food, Waste Not, Want Not. This paper turned the conversation about food waste and achieving global food security upside down, reporting that up to 50% of the food produced today is wasted. The author of this paper, Dr. Tim Fox, will join us next to discuss with us what he has learned through conducting the research for this paper and some of the potential solutions for capturing lost food handled in the supply chain in order to contribute to achieving the goal of global food security. Tim is head of energy and environment at the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. His role involves developing and communicating the institution's policies on energy, environment, and sustainability issues, authoring thought leadership reports, and providing input to government policymakers. He has a broad range of research and engineering practice experience gained across many industrial sectors, including the built environment, energy, and chemical processing and transportation sectors. Tim has worked on commercial enterprises, government agencies, and educational institutions in the UK, Australia, Canada, and the Netherlands. Please join me in welcoming Tim Fox to the stage.
Well, thank you very much, Philip, and thank you very much, IFAMA, for inviting me to join you this morning. I just start off by saying a couple of words really about the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. I think that for many people it was a little bit of a surprise when we came into the discussion and the debate back in January. But actually what I'm going to walk you through will show you that there is a very logical sequence in the way in which we came to this topic. The Institution of Mechanical Engineers is the UK's registration body for the professional mechanical engineering community, both in the UK and indeed 20% of our membership is overseas. Our role is really to register engineers, to accredit university degrees in engineering, and to take engineers on their professional development journey throughout their careers. But one of the key areas that we get involved in is we do thinking around the issues that are related to mechanical engineering, and we provide guidance and thought on policy in association with those. So what we do is we look at areas that have impact on mechanical engineering and where we think mechanical engineering has something to say, and areas that are challenging society and where mechanical engineering will make a major contribution. And so this is really where we came to this topic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the report that we did this year. You have a copy of the executive summary on your table. The report has an enormous amount of information in it. I'm not going to go through all of that. I'll leave you to cover that at your leisure. But I'm going to walk you through the thinking behind the report. We came at this as a result of some work we had done the previous year. The pointer doesn't work, but the population report that we did the previous year, where we looked at the issues that were related to the challenge of 21st century population growth. And what we were looking at is the demand that was going to come forward for food, energy, water, and shelter in the 21st century context being urbanization. And we looked at what the engineering challenges were associated with this. And our key finding from this report, which looked at the change in demographics around the world, was that the engineering solutions to enable us to move forward are actually there in place. We don't have to wait for any dramatic breakthroughs in science or technology. The things we're working on today and the knowledge we have today in the engineering and the engineering practice community mean that we can meet many of the challenges that present themselves to us in those areas. And so as part of that work, we became aware of the key role of food in meeting the 21st century population challenge. And so we decided that we would investigate this area in a lot more detail. And so I'm going to talk to you about the food, water, energy nexus, which is at the core of the opportunity that we have as a human civilization to move forward in a sustainable way. So I'm going to talk about the good news from the report that we produced. And I'm going to tell you about the issues that we found surrounding waste and losses and what that offers as an opportunity for meeting that 21st century challenge across not only the food sector, but the water, energy, and the land use issues associated with those. And then I'm going to say something about what needs to change. And I'm really going to focus on that more than anything else in this talk. Because as we heard yesterday from Hugh, 99% of talks tend to focus on the doom and gloom, on the staggering size of the challenge, and we've heard more than enough of that already, so I'm not going to focus too much on that. But I do need to say a couple of words, really, about what the demographic looks like going forward. So we'll all be familiar with the statistics and the projections and the scenarios that tell us that if we take a median approach from the UN's data, that we're going to end up with a population peak of around about 9.5 million, somewhere around about 2075. But what's interesting about this graph is that the bulk of the population growth is going to be taking place in Southeast Asia and also in Sub-Saharan Africa. And in fact, Sub-Saharan Africa, as you know, is likely to double its population between now and the end of the century. And in many countries, that actually means a tripling or a quadrupling of population. And what's interesting is that in the developed, mature economies, populations are stabilizing. And in fact, the challenge there is more about an aging population. So the keys to this narrative and the keys to this conversation really lie in our understanding of the demographic change that's going to take place in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So that work was covered extensively in our population report. We worked with the UN and with the World Population Council on that report in terms of understanding the population challenge, which was the starting point for us as engineers. You know, it's like, what's the exam question? What's the design parameters that we have to work with? So that gives you some context, and we know as a group, we know that this is going to lead to increased demand for food. We're expecting something like a 70% increase in agricultural demand by 2050. That has impacts on water. We know that 70% of the water that is abstracted by human beings on the planet today for their use is used in the agricultural and food business. And so the impact of that business and that activity on global water demand is enormous. So we're extracting about 4 trillion meters cubed of water a year, and 70% of that is going into the production of food. So we know that we're going to see an increased urbanization as we move forward. 70% of people in the city environment, in the urban landscape by 2050. And we know that we need to support all of that with enormous amounts of energy. Energy is how we move people out of poverty. Energy is how we increase the well-being and we keep the economic engine running. And of course, as part of the challenge that we face, we know that with that population demographic shift taking place in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, we are potentially going to see dietary changes leading to increased demand for animal-based products. And all of this, of course, is exacerbated by the environmental risk and the environmental change associated with the impact that we're having on the biosphere. So there's our challenge. We understand it. We've heard about it in the last day of the conference. And so the question is, where is the key to unlocking the solution to this? And one of the key things that we discovered during this piece of work that we did on food waste was that the relationship between food, water, and energy is absolutely critical. If I had more time, I would show you this YouTube clip, which was put together by Saab Miller, which shows the relationship in a very nice sort of cartoon way between water, food, and energy. But I haven't really got enough time, so I'd point you to this, where you could click on that on the internet version of this presentation. But the key point is that if you think about it, food is sucking up enormous amounts of water. I've already given some kind of feeling for that. The energy used in food production, it takes around about 7 to 10 calories of energy to produce 1 calorie of edible food. And if you think about the energy used for fertilizers, something like 3% of the world's energy consumption is in the production of fertilizers. So there's a huge and enormous relationship between food, water, and energy. And it goes even further than that. I mean, if you think about how you move water around, we as engineers are designing systems continually to pump water, to shift water, to treat water, to get it into irrigation systems, to get it there to the point in the crop where it's needed. And that all uses energy. Here in the United States, something like 13% of electricity is used in just moving and processing water. So there are layers and layers in this relationship between food, water, and energy. So at the institution, we asked ourselves the question, well, as engineers, as an engineering profession, we are continually called upon to deliver more water, more energy, and to do that in an effective and a sustainable way to meet growing demand. And there's growing demand in many sectors of the human activity. So the question that we asked ourselves was, well, how much of this demand associated with food is really necessary? Because as engineers, we have a holistic picture of all of these sectors, and how can we deliver all of this extra demand for domestic energy use, heating energy use, industrial energy use, and I could say exactly the same for water, and how much of it do we really have to deliver? And how can we do it sustainably? So that was the exam question that we set ourselves, in particular in recognition of that relationship between food, water, and energy. So what we do when we set about these projects is our engineers do not represent any particular sector or any particular trade when they participate in the activities of the institution, because we're an unbiased, independent, professional body, a learned society. So they leave their industry hat at the door, and we talk openly and through Chatham rules type processes to build consensus around what the issues are and how we can tackle them. So I brought together a project team of members and fellows of the institution, and we set about looking at this challenge over the period of 18 months to come up with our findings. And many of these engineers worked at all points in the food sector, from the design of agricultural equipment right the way through to the cold chains and refrigeration systems in modern supermarkets. So what did we find? Well, the answer is actually good news. And we were very surprised that the answer was such good news. What we found is that on our estimates, that were the way in which we came to our estimates was we combined information that was in the public domain and well understood in the public domain and peer-reviewed material in the public domain, and we connected that with the practical experience of our engineers who have worked in the sectors for many, many decades and who had access to material that cannot be put into the public domain and is uncitable, but they have long histories of experience in all sectors of the food, agricultural and food community. And what we came up with was that an estimate of between 30 and 50% of the food that is produced annually is wasted or lost. So that represents something around about 1.2 to 2 billion tons of the 4 billion tons of annual production. And what we discovered is that if you just do the basic math on that, then the opportunity to feed 9.5 billion people is really very clear if we can do something about tackling this waste and loss issue. Because we're currently feeding around 6 billion people on something like 2 to 2.8 billion tons. The population's around 7 billion, but of course we know that there's something like 1 billion who go to bed hungry every night. So we're adequately feeding around 6 billion. So to feed 9 to 10 billion, if you just do the basic math, then we're not far off 4 billion tons. Now, clearly, we're not going to be able to tighten up on every single piece of waste or loss, but it gives us a really good indicator of what the potential solution space looks like. And of course, if we do something about that, then we radically reduce our future demand for water, energy, and land use. And if you think about it, something like a quarter of the world's water, that's 1 trillion meters cubed of water a year, that is abstracted, that amount of water is lost in wasted food and lost food annually. So we abstract about 4 trillion meters cubed of water, and we're losing a quarter of that. So 1 trillion meters cubed of water is just thrown away. So the cascading demand on energy associated with that, let alone the energy that goes into the food that's wasted, has enormous impact. So where are these wastes and losses taking place? Well, we've heard something about this during the conference, and we know that there are basically two dimensions to this. That food loss is really taking place in the developing and emerging economies. So when we talk about lost food, we're talking about food that, that gets lost in the system as a result of inadequacies in the system, somewhere between the farm and the field and the actual human consumer at the other end. And we're losing something like 30 to 50% of our food in developing economies. And this is through inadequate infrastructure in storage and transportation. Now, on the other side, in mature developed economies like the United States, Europe, we've got incredibly efficient at getting the food from the field to the retailer and to the customer. But at that point, things reverse. And we've become incredibly wasteful in our practices as consumers and retailers. And we're, again, wasting somewhere between 30 and 50% of our food. So what's happening is that we're actually, on average, losing about 30 to 50, wasting and losing about 30 to 50% of food globally. Now, the waste is occurring in mature developed economies really as a result of poor retail practices that are encouraging over-purchasing, supermarket contracts that leave produce in the field because it's not cosmetically pleasing, consumer behavior at home, and we've heard a little bit about the relative value of food that different consumers have, and hospitality industry procurement practices. And I mean, we've just seen some of that at this conference. You know, yesterday I sat at the table down here, and I would say probably 40% of the food didn't get eaten. I saw salads and desserts going back to the kitchen. Where did they end up? Okay? So it's clear to see once you start looking around, and actually, when you add up the numbers at each step in the food supply chain, you know, it doesn't take long before you realize that 30 to 50% might actually be a little bit of a conservative estimate. So where is the food loss? Let's concentrate on the two bits. As I said, food loss is really about inadequate infrastructure, and it's really totally unnecessary. It's about poorly engineered infrastructure around food handling at the farm, around storage at the farm, or storage in the distribution system, and transportation. And these are all solvable. This is not rocket science. This is 101 engineering. And we can do this relatively straightforward. It's very simple things like making sure that the buildings have guttering systems on them so the rainwater is carried away from the walls of the building so we don't get damp building walls that then lead to deterioration of the grains inside. It's simple things like closing up the gaps between concrete slabs to stop rodents and pests infesting buildings. It's these kind of simple processes. It's not rocket science. It's about putting in place basic cold chains to enable access to market. So I'm not going to go through all these stats. If you want lots of stats, the report is bristling in stats. But I'm giving you a sense of the type of numbers here associated with food losses in the developing world. And so, you know, we have the engineering expertise and the practice knowledge to be able to do something about that. And it's actually a unique opportunity. And I want to explain why it's a unique opportunity. And it comes back to that issue of that demographic distribution that I was talking about earlier. Because the bulk of population growth is going to take place in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, and as those economies move forward, emerging and developing, there is a unique opportunity to make sure that these emerging nations and emerging regions adopt clean, sustainable approaches to their technology at the start. And that's really important to everybody on the planet, because if you do some calculations around what the footprint of systems would be if these emerging and developing economies adopt the same kind of systems as us and the same practices as we have at the moment, then the numbers begin to get quite staggering in terms of environmental risk and environmental change. So if you look at the rapidly developing world, so I'm thinking here, think China, think India, the issue here is really about making sure that the infrastructure that is being put in place minimizes losses. But not only that, there's a big challenge for education and training and skills development, because all of that infrastructure needs to be maintained, it needs to be operated, and it needs to be understood. And so there's an enormous need for the transfer of sustainable engineering practice knowledge to enable these systems to be maintained once they've been constructed. It's not just about constructing the systems. There's an issue around dietary preferences. We know that if we move towards a more animal product-based system entirely around the world, then we're going to see some real significant challenges there. So building on traditional cultures and traditional aspirations around food is an important factor. And there's responsibility there for food retailers that are moving into developing parts of the world to ensure that they do not lead to unnecessary aspirational developments around lifestyles that go outside traditional cultures and might have significant impact. So there's a lot of work to be done there, and there's a lot of work to be done on ensuring that as those economies develop, they don't end up with the same wasteful practices as consumers that we have developed in developed mature economies. Emerging economies, though, really offer the biggest opportunity, because here we have nascent infrastructure that really has not reached any sense of maturity. In most of sub-Saharan Africa, the very most basic cold chains are not in existence. And there's a tremendous opportunity to develop those cold chains based on renewable energy, on clean technology, energy storage applications, on renewable energy that brings a much cleaner future to those countries, and using information technology systems, some of which we've heard about in this conference so far. And what we call this at the institution is we call this a clean tech leapfrog. Just enable these countries to just completely leapfrog over the unsustainable phase of industrialization and avoid the mistakes and the failures that we have achieved in the developed mature economies. But then, we really need to put our house in order. Food waste is a major challenge for mature developed economies. So, as I mentioned earlier, the retail practices that we have that lead to 30% of the harvest wasted before it even reaches the marketplace, crop rejections that can run in developed mature economies up to 20 to 30%, but the impact that our food supply chains have on developing nations is also incredibly important. I mean, if we just think about Kenya, regularly something like 40% of the fruit and vegetable crop that is developed for UK supermarkets is rejected because the produce is not the right color, the right size, or the right shape. And it just gets left in the field and plowed back into the field. And that is just incredibly wasteful and is about our own practices, our own procurement practices. And sales promotion that encourages over-purchasing. So offers that encourage customers to buy more than they can use. And because customers and citizens have had a disconnect with their culinary skills in recent decades, as soon as that material starts to go off or starts to look discolored in the fridge or the cupboard, many of us in mature developed economies will just throw it out. We have lost the skill set that enables us to do something with that food, to make a soup out of it, or to use it in a recipe where it doesn't have to be perfect. We get frightened and we throw it away. And we need to change that culture. We need to reconnect with our culinary skills, because we're wasting something like 30% to 50% of what we purchase, we're wasting in the home because of those issues. We've got the technology to ensure that we can store the food correctly at home, but the problem is that we just don't know what to do with it when it starts to go out of what we regard as a perfect state. And the hospitality industry, I've already mentioned this, what a staggering figure that 30% of the food that's purchased by the hospitality industry ends up being thrown away. And of course, this is a really big challenge for the hospitality industry, because there is always the issue of having to have a full menu available and to make sure that people have sufficient food, and balancing that with the need to reduce waste. So there are big issues to be solved there. So what needs to change? I said I was going to focus on this end of the talk. There are many layers. It's about collaboration. It's about partnership. It's about multidisciplinary approaches. As an engineering profession, I'm standing here talking to you. We're part of a multidisciplined solution to this. And it's about taking at the international level an approach that enables us to transfer that engineering knowledge and that sustainable practice knowledge, enabling us to transfer that into developing and emerging economies to ensure that they have the infrastructure and the talent and the human ability to meet the challenge of operating and maintaining that clean, sustainable infrastructure that is reducing the food losses. At the national level, our governments need to reclaim national food policy. In recent decades, food policy has been devolved to the private sector, to the retailers. And we need to reclaim that national food policy at the government level to be able to do something about these issues, to encourage change both in our retail practices and in our supply chain practices and in our homes. We need to raise public awareness of the food waste issue. There is no shortcut to doing that. In the UK, we've had an incredibly successful program over the last 20 years by our waste resource project called WRAP, that has encouraged UK recycling of glass, tin cans, etc. 20 years ago, people wouldn't have thought about it. Now, people get incredibly guilty if they don't put their tins and cans out for recycling. It took 20 years of education. We need a same education program, same information program, but the advantage we have now with food waste is that we can use social media and all the technology that's available to us to enable us to provide that information and transfer that knowledge in a much quicker way and accelerate that process. And one of the things we noticed is that I've done hundreds and hundreds of media interviews, thousands of them around food waste. And one of the things you always notice is that people really understand the problem. Citizens really understand the problem. The difficulty is they feel that they are not empowered to do something about it. And we need to help them to be empowered, to reconnect with their culinary skills and to understand how they can change their behavior to avoid food waste. And there's a role there for the retailers in terms of providing information. And UK retailers are really taking this on board now, trying to use social media and modern communication approaches to help their customers understand what they can do with the food, how they can use the food when it's not cosmetically perfect, and to offer a range of opportunities for customers to reconnect with that skill set. So there's a big role for retailers, not only in helping to raise that public awareness message and increase the skills of the citizens, but also in terms of auditing their supply chains and taking responsibility for that 40% of food that is rejected in Kenya because we don't want it because it's not the right color, okay? So citizens, we come back to a kind of virtuous circle. Citizens themselves need to put pressure on their politicians to change things. And they need to be empowered to reconnect with the value of food. As we've heard earlier, something like only 10% of the household budget in the UK and the USA goes towards food, whereas in developing and emerging economies, that can be anywhere between 50 and 80%. In the mature developed economies, we need to reconnect with the value of food and its impact that it has on energy, water, and land use. So, in summary, to conclude, reducing food waste and loss could significantly help meet the challenges of food security for 9.5 billion people in the 21st century. As I say, I've said it several times, I'll say it again, this is not rocket science. We can do this, and it's good news. We can go a substantial way. We will still have to increase productivity. We will still have to help guard against environmental risks associated with climate change, etc. There's a huge amount of research and technology development to do in relation to those activities, but fundamentally, there is no reason why we should not be able to feed 9.5 billion people. And we have a unique opportunity right now to move forward globally in a sustainable way and to ensure that the solution for everybody is equitable and amenable. And really what this boils down to is not really about the engineering. Engineering is part of the multidiscipline solution to this. This is really about finance, politics, regulation, ethics, issues of access and ownership, and these are the key barriers to meeting these challenges. So, this afternoon at 2:15, I'll be moderating a panel where we're going to look at some of these issues in more detail, looking at how we create value in the supply chain and how we reduce waste. And I would encourage you to come along to that panel and to enter into this discussion in a wider way. Thank you very much.